Cherokee families didn't reach for a bottle when someone's chest tightened and the cough wouldn't stop. They reached for wild cherry bark and honey. Two ingredients. One of them is probably already in your kitchen. The other is a tree growing wild from Georgia to Ontario. Wild cherry bark syrup held an official entry in the United States Pharmacopoeia from the 1800s into the early 1900s. Then, in 1926, it was quietly removed. What replaced it was something you cannot grow, something you cannot make, something you can only buy. Think about what that means. Before the cough syrup aisle existed, before amber bottles with child-proof caps lined every pharmacy shelf, there was a remedy system built from what was growing outside the door. Cherokee communities across the southern Appalachians had worked with wild cherry bark for a very long time, not as ceremony, not as mysticism, but as systematic practical knowledge. The kind of working wisdom every household carried because it simply worked. Before commercial formulas existed, this was the formula, and for at least 200 years before a single manufactured cough syrup appeared on any shelf, it held. Here is what made it work. The inner bark of wild cherry, the layer just beneath the rougher outer surface, contains compounds that act directly on the cough reflex, not suppressing the cough entirely, calming the cycle. That irritated loop the body gets caught in, where the urge to cough keeps feeding itself, responds to what is inside that bark in a way that researchers documented going back well over a century. Honey does something completely different. Honey coats. It lays a slow protective layer across the surface of the throat, soothes the raw tissue, creates a natural buffer against that abraded, burning feeling that makes every cough worse. Together they work on two fronts at the same time. One calms the reflex, one repairs the surface. Simple enough to prepare in any household. Old enough that no one quite remembers when it started. The records are not hard to find if you know where to look. Charles Millspaugh published American Medicinal Plants in 1892 and documented wild cherry bark as a recognized medicinal agent. King's American Dispensatory from 1898 described wild cherry syrup. Preparations in careful technical detail. These were not fringe pamphlets. These were legitimate medical reference works used by practicing physicians across the country. And in 1891, ethnographer James Mooney went into Cherokee territory and came back with documented records of systematic, organized plant knowledge. Not superstition, not guesswork, but a careful working understanding of which plants did what and why. Stay with me, because this is where the story widens considerably. Wild cherry bark was never a narrow practice. It moved. Early Appalachian families picked it up. Frontier households built it into their standard approach to coughs and respiratory discomfort. It crossed from community knowledge into colonial medicine and then into formal American pharmacopoeia. From Georgia to Ontario, Prunus serratina, the wild black cherry tree, grew everywhere. And so did the knowledge tied to it. By the mid-1800s, wild cherry syrup was not marginal. It was standard. Referenced in legitimate medical texts, documented by researchers, used broadly and unremarkably across the region. The kind of knowledge that belonged to anyone who knew what grew nearby. What happened to it is worth examining carefully. The knowledge did not disappear because it failed. It got absorbed and then quietly redirected. Researchers documented the plant, physicians recorded its use, and when commercial cough remedies began consolidating in the early 20th century, the industry took exactly what it needed. Not the bark, not the honey, the name, the flavor, the color. Go look at a bottle of cherry-flavored cough syrup right now. Read the ingredient label. You will find dextromethorphan, alcohol, corn syrup, and artificial cherry flavoring. You will find the word cherry on the label, on the box, in the color. What you will not find is Prunus serratina. What you will not find is wild cherry bark. The compound that calmed the cough reflex was replaced with a synthetic substitute that requires a pharmaceutical plant to produce. The honey base, the thing that soothed and coated and made the remedy land on the surface of the throat, was replaced with alcohol and sweetener, easier to manufacture, shelf-stable, profitable in a way a tree is not. The name stayed. The plant left. Now here is the number that keeps appearing every time you follow this trail. 1926, that is the year wild cherry bark syrup was removed from the United States Pharmacopoeia, the official reference document of American medicine, the book that determines what is recognized and what is not. Wild cherry bark had held a place in that book for most of the 1800s. It made it into the early 20th century, and then, quietly, without public ceremony, it was gone. No dramatic announcement, no disproven study, just absent. The question is not simply what changed in 1926. The question is who needed that change and what was already waiting to replace it. That answer is where this story turns. The year 1906 is where the modern obstruction begins, not with hidden agendas spelled out in any document, with legislation. The Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906 placed the first federal framework over what remedies could claim and how they could be sold. That was not entirely unreasonable. Patent medicines of the era made genuinely reckless promises, but the machinery that Act created, the requirement to validate, to prove, to certify at significant cost, was machinery that unpatentable plants could never navigate. You cannot patent a tree. You cannot own a bark that grows wild across an entire continent. And when the regulatory system began demanding expensive clinical evidence behind every health claim, plants like wild cherry bark faced a wall that pharmaceutical manufacturers were already built to climb. 1926 was not an isolated event. It was part of a consolidation. As pharmaceutical companies standardized the cough remedy market through the 1920s, the official pharmacopoeia quietly narrowed what belonged in its pages. Remedies that could be manufactured, measured, patented, and sold at scale stayed. Remedies that grew on trees in the Appalachian foothills that belonged to no company, that could be prepared by any ordinary household, those started to disappear, not banned outright, just no longer officially recognized. And once the official recognition was gone, something deeper went with it, the cultural confidence to use what grew around you. Then came 1938. The Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act raised the bar even higher. Natural remedies now required clinical evidence at a cost that made the whole project commercially impossible for anything that could not be owned. If you cannot patent it, you cannot recover the investment to prove it. And if you cannot prove it by the new rules, it disappears from sanctioned use. Not because it stopped working, because you cannot patent a tree. Notice what that meant in practice. 3 decades of tightening regulation, and the knowledge that lived inside Cherokee communities, inside Appalachian households, inside anyone who knew which bark to reach for, became officially nothing, unproven, unverified. The remedy aisle filled with certified products. The plant knowledge that predated those certificates by generations became something you quietly stopped mentioning out loud. Here is the part nobody tells you. The science did eventually catch up. It just did not change anything on the shelf. In 2007, Penn State University published a study comparing honey directly against dextromethorphan, the active cough-suppressing ingredient in most over-the-counter. Cough syrups, real study, peer-reviewed, published in the Archives of Pediatrics and Adolescent Medicine. The focus was nighttime cough relief in children. The result was not close. Honey outperformed the pharmaceutical compound, measurably. The researchers were credible, the methodology was sound, and the findings made headlines for exactly one moment. A short wave of coverage, a health roundup mention, a brief segment. Then the noise faded and the shelves stayed exactly as they were. 3 years later, in 2010, the World Health Organization formally acknowledged honey as a legitimate demulcent for respiratory irritation. The same surface coating, throat-soothing role that Cherokee families had built into their remedy long before anyone ran a clinical trial on anything. 2 independent validations, separated by decades of regulatory silence from the original knowledge. And still the amber bottles with the cherry labels and the artificial flavoring stayed right where they were. Not forgotten by accident, just not useful to the people who control what gets stocked. This is where it comes back to your kitchen. Honey is already there. Wild cherry bark is available dried at herbal suppliers and natural food stores, and the tree it comes from grows wild across eastern North America, possibly close enough that you could walk to it. The basic preparation concept is exactly what it sounds like. Bark steeped in warm water, strained, stirred into honey, kept in a jar. A household approach, not a clinical formula. Something that belongs in a home the way a comfort remedy always should. Simple, inexpensive, and made from things you can actually recognize and source yourself. Compare that to a $12 bottle flavored to taste like the fruit of the very tree whose bark used to do the actual work. Next time the cough won't stop at 2 in the morning, reach for the honey first. Not because this video told you, because Penn State researchers said so. Because the World Health Organization said so. Because Cherokee families said so, long before any of those institutions existed to validate anything. Here is what the full trail adds up to. Cherokee communities carried this knowledge for generations. The pharmacopoeia confirmed it was real. Penn State validated the mechanism. And the pharmacy shelf ignored all of it. That is not coincidence. That is a pattern. And once you can see it, you start noticing it everywhere. Every aisle, every label, every product that replaced something older, simpler, and more honest with something manufactured, branded, and marked up beyond recognition. You are the kind of person who notices. Have you ever used honey for a cough? Did it actually work? Drop your answer in the comments, because the people watching this are exactly the kind of people whose real experience matters most. Next time, we are going into the bark Cherokee communities, used for something even older than cough season. The tree it comes from is probably already growing in your backyard. And the story behind why most people walk past it every single day without knowing what it holds, that one goes even deeper than this.